Hi, Jenny. How are you? Good morning. Hi, Kathy. Good morning. Cherry Bomb, good morning. Welcome in. D. Phillips, good morning. Anita, nice. What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining and saying hi. Nothing really planned this morning. I'm just kind of getting back in the feeling the vibe of going live and producing content. I released a podcast yesterday for anybody that does follow the podcast. So I'm getting back in the swing of things, and I thought it would be nice to kind of get on here and say hi to everybody, or anybody that did want to jump on or is just kind of wasting some time this morning or wanted to hang out and see what thoughts come. That's what I'm here to do this morning. First, let me get my computer on. Let's see who's here. They call me DI. Nancy, thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you if you've been following over the last couple of years. As I've gotten this TikTok channel going, I appreciate your support, as it's kind of been sporadic. Some content coming out like a ton and then stopping. For those of you that listen to the podcast, you probably know why. I just kind of went over it yesterday, but as I go through in the introduction, just the first post up here in this live, I've over the course of the last 5 years realized that I'm a psychic medium. And I don't like saying it that way because it makes it seem as if it's like a gift that I have that other people don't have. And that's not true. It's actually something I've learned throughout the process of waking up in this way. The truth is actually that human beings have these abilities. It's more like a sixth sense, something that's been trained out of us that we've forgotten for a very long time. And that once we realize that we do have this other sense, we're able to interface with the world and other people in ways that really kind of will open up your life, show you a whole new world. And this is happening around the world right now. I'm sure all of you can see that, but if you've been wondering why people are looking so crazy, especially figures that have been somewhat stable for a long period of time, that's why. It's because the energy is shifting, and globally, as a civilization, we're coming online to understanding another form or another way of perceiving the world that is just as true as the ways we've perceived it thus far. The only difference is this is like an evolutionary step along that path. So it's not that any other perspective has been wrong up until now. It's that those have been pieces that seemed disconnected but actually fit together in ways that once fit together produce a new perspective, a new outlook on the world and life. And so I think for anybody that's a little off-put by all of the chaos, somewhat of a comforting message, right? That it's not a time frame to be worried. It's a time frame to look forward to the change and to embrace it in yourself as you see it happening in the world, as you see indicators that things are going wrong in the world. That's not a opportunity for us to kind of criticize the world and blame everybody else. It's an opportunity for us to take whatever lessons being presented there and try to apply it in our own lives. And if we can do that, if we can figure out how that relates, we will solve a small part of the problem that we call our life, right? And in doing that, move the whole civilization that micro step forward. I do believe that this is how we heal as a civilization, as a community, is through looking inward and being kind of critical of ourselves in the right ways, and fighting the urge to project that outwards first, right? Anyway, some channeled messages coming through right away. Hope you enjoyed that, but I have to take a second to catch my breath, because whenever they do, I get a lot of energy comes through and it feels like I'm choking almost. It feels like it's hard to breathe. That's also how I know that it's a significant message, right? For you, whoever's watching right now, right? If you get those kind of moments, those feelings I'm getting too, if you ever, because this is a very unique experience. When I feel like I'm channeling, it's a physical experience. It's something that you can feel in your body, but it's very subtle and you have to pay attention to recognize it. And what I've recognized as I've woken up is I've done this my whole life, but I didn't realize or recognize that I was able to channel certain messages because I would keep myself from doing that. Because the urge, the feeling internally is actually quite uncomfortable. It feels like something's talking to you. That's the best way I could put it. It feels like something's moving your mouth. and you have to get out of the way of it, right? And so it's a very kind of humbling experience in a weird way, because when you hear the term Jesus take the wheel, right, it's an act of letting go of the wheel and letting something else that you believe in step in for that moment in time and bring whatever message is appropriate, right? And so it's a very uncomfortable experience, and it makes me shaky. It makes me feel uneasy at times. And I think the reason that is because the energy is so much bigger than I am. It's not mine, right? These messages aren't mine. These are messages that are being delivered by things that are grander than me, that are universal. And so when I allow it to speak through me, there's certain humbling that happens it's not fun, I guess is the best way to put it, which is why I think people misunderstand this process partially. It's also because people present it improperly, I think, as well. There's an energy sacrifice that's required. And I think, or I guess I'm speaking about this so that you know, anybody that's watching, the 25 of you that are in here right now, there's a reason you're sitting here right now and listening to what I'm saying. And it's because there's some aspect of you that's hearing what I'm saying, and it's calling to that same experience, right? It's very subtle, these things are, and oftentimes it's hard to identify by ourselves. We need kind of another perspective that can look at it and say, hey, you see that? You know what I mean? And for so long in the world, we have been kept from doing that. We've been lied to in a way that keeps us perpetuating the lie, so that we don't allow ourselves to speak truth, and we degrade ourselves, and then we blame ourselves for the degradation, right? In reality, we have to kind of come to a place where we trust ourselves enough to get out of the way like that, to let go of the wheel and allow yourself to speak. Hi, we are Reflections. I see you. Anyway, that's what's coming through for right now. Let me see if I missed any questions here. Jenny says, I didn't know what it was. If we're speaking on what I was just talking about, Jenny, then yes, there's some physical experiences that you can have in life that are unenunciated, right? And like I said, they're very subtle. And so without another perspective to speak on it, it can make you feel very isolated and lonely, actually. Because it's not that you don't feel those things, it's that those unenunciated parts of ourselves go unenunciated so long that they have to live like a shadow. You have to live like a shadow life, almost internally, where the world, it doesn't give you anything of sustenance in terms of emotional fulfillment, right, or spiritual fulfillment. And so this part of you that is thirsty for that sits there waiting for an opportunity to kind of reinvigorate itself. And when the world is focused on everything else besides, the spiritual and the emotional side of life, when it's actually actively trying to avoid or deconstruct that part of ourselves feels abused and ignored, right? And oftentimes that's why it's so hard for us to get this part of ourselves to really engage with the world and open up. It's because it feels disrespected, It's like one of the most beautiful aspects of you, if you hide that from the world, it teaches that thing, that part of you, if you think about it as like a separate person inside of you, it teaches that other person inside of you that it's not worth anything, right? And I think the saddest part about this truth, if you're sitting here with me, you have an opportunity to do something about that. But there's been a large part of history, most of human history, where this has been unenunciated or actively fought against, right? This part of the human being, because it's something that's uncontrollable. The reason you see so many figures, spiritual figures throughout history, becoming martyrs in that way is because bringing that kind of spiritual message into the world liberates people. And when you liberate people in systems that are designed to control those same people, you become an enemy of those systems, right? And so you suffer the consequences. And this is why we have so many examples of that throughout history. But we live in a time where this right here exists. I can speak directly to you, right? I can speak to the whole world, and we can all do that at the same time. And there's something about that that circumnavigates the restrictions that have been in place up until now, that have kept every human being, I believe, up until this point, feeling that kind of pain that you're feeling, but never being able to resolve it. Right? Never having another person sitting there saying, I hear you, I see you. Right? Having to read a book to get an example of that. I don't think that's right. I think that needs to end, and I think the way it ends is through people being honest about themselves, who they are. It gets me emotional just talking about it, because I can feel the tragedy in that, right? There's something so tragic about the human being not being itself and then punishing itself for what it thinks it is, when that definition that it's punishing itself for is the lie, right? All of the ways we see the human being express itself, all of the horrible ways, these are expressions of what happens to a human being when it's not able to be itself. When you restrict that thing, it mutates into something nasty. And I just kind of described how that process happens through restricting that other version of ourselves internally. But if you let that mutate for long enough, if you torture that thing long enough, it turns into something that hates not just you, but the whole world. Right? And it's a powerful thing. It's a spiritual part of you. It is the spiritual part of you. And I think what's happened in the modern world, at least, is that's become malignant to a degree. That side of the human being that's been unrecognized, the spiritual side, has become malignant to where it now is acting in ways that are uncontrollable for most people. And they are questioning, why am I acting this way? Why do I feel this way? Why am I becoming nastier? Why am I becoming more angry? Right? And on the surface, it looks like it's everybody else's fault. It looks like it's the world's fault because it's degrading. But I believe truly, and this is what I've learned myself, is that the secret is the world is a reflection of you, not the other way around. And this sounds very cliche because you hear spiritual teachers talk about this throughout the ages, but there's a reason they do. And it's because it is true. Fundamentally, it is the truth. Your internal world, how you feel inside, is what you will see in the world. I promise you that. So that if you have this part of yourself that hates the world, what you'll see in the world is chaos, war, infighting, right? And the true practical reason for that is that we are all linked. We're all the same being. The human being, right? There's different pieces of that human being. One piece of it is me, Chris Turner. One piece of it is you, Jenny, right? But there's billions of pieces of this thing that all make up one entity, and we don't think of that properly. The human being is one entity. And when it's divided against itself, what it produces is what we call war. Is all of the nastiness that we've seen throughout human history. And then we attribute that nastiness to the human being as if that's a default nature. But it's not. That's the lie. Right? The human being unadulterated is what you see in figures like Jesus or the Buddha. That's the human being. Being itself. And it has miraculous qualities. Qualities that we believe are magic modern day, because we're so detached from the practical aspect of how that works inside of us. We think it's magic, it's impossible. I'm here to tell you it isn't. I know that because I've healed myself from things that I didn't think I could come back from. And I didn't have anybody else doing that for me. I did that with me and God. And I think the only reason I did that was so that I could understand this right now, what I'm telling to you, that is true. Right? You see in stories of the Bible, right, and specifically the New Testament with Jesus, there's talks of works, right, the miracles that Jesus did. And one of the things that I've always been struck by is kind of the way we view that as a magical thing, right? That there's something magical about Jesus, that he's doing magic to heal these people. But over the last couple of years, I've started to think about it differently. And I think it's because I've started to realize this process internally, that what Jesus was practically doing, I believe, for people was something different than wishing them well. He wasn't wishing them well. He was showing them what faith is, right? I know when these things are true because I get overwhelmed with emotion, like hit like a freight train, right? I can feel these energies wanting to say this, that it's about the demonstration of faith, that when a human being believes truly in something, it enables that in reality. And so what Jesus did was held that space for those people that were at the end of the rope. That's why he went to the broken. That's why he didn't go to the rich man. That's why he didn't go to the senator, the statesman, right? He went to the destitute, to the prostitute, right? To the blind man, to the deaf man, to the people in those societies that were cast out, who were worthless in that society. Because he knew that those were the people that were ready to see this truth. It's a practical thing. If you have everything, you can't see this. You don't have a necessity, a need to believe in anything, because you have everything. But when you have nothing, the only way you get out of that is through faith. Thank you, Evie. Appreciate you. It's the only way. And so Jesus comes to these people at the end of the rope, and he shows them what it means to believe, that even where they're at, they're not lost. Somebody loves them, and then they can love themselves. And I believe that in that process, there is an actual healing. I've had it happen to me. I've experienced it. Physical pain can leave. Visual problems, hearing problems, tension and pain in your body that you thought was from broken bones or misaligned spine or whatever it is. All of these different things that we've told ourselves, this is why this problem is there. I promise you that's not why. The reason it's there is because you don't believe. Hold on one second. Let me take this thing out. I have one of those little zins in, and every time I speak, I can see it, and it makes me self-conscious, so I'm taking it out. Anyway, there's something in that, in the belief. It enables your healing. It turns your body on to the healing process. It allows that energy to flow through you, and it doesn't do it immediately, right? One of the things from those stories that we take away is that part of why we feel it's magic is because it happens instantaneously, right? And I believe that's possible. But I believe more often what happens for us is the healing journey is a journey of losing everything first, so you get to the point where those people were. And then the healing happens, right? And in the modern day, even if we think we have nothing, we have a lot, right? We're blessed with a lot, especially if you live in the United States like I do. We've been gifted a lot from the prior generations. And so there's a lot that we didn't know there's a lot that we don't know what it feels like to not have, right? And so I think a lot of what happens in the modern awakening process is first, you get knocked off of the place that you're at. And for a period of time, it looks like the entire world is crumbling because there's a necessity for you to reach the end of that rope so that you can see the truth of faith. Because without that, you won't see it. You won't choose it. Right? And so if you ask to wake up, what you're asking to do is lose everything you have in some ways, right? And this is the scary part of the awakening process, and this is partially why most people don't go through it. It's why there is a choice offered every human being, right? And it's why you see many people making the wrong choice modern day. It's because it's the most fundamental choice you can make in your life. It's terrifying. And so many people choose to double down on the lives that they've lived up until this point, the things they've done to get the things they have up until this point. And the sad part about it is the future that's coming is going to require more of those kinds of sacrifices to keep all of that, right? If you accumulated all of this stuff, it doesn't matter, right? It truly, in the end, doesn't matter. How do you learn that without losing all of it? So if you don't want to learn that lesson, you won't, but you'll do everything you can to hold on to that stuff. And there's sacrifices that will entail that you won't recognize in the moment. Maybe the sacrifice ends up being your wife or your family, right? Or friends. I think a lot of the sacrifice that's been asked of young women in the world right now over the last 20 years is that. They've been asked to sacrifice a family for professional gain, right? And I do think that's been a lie, told very specifically to women. It gets into a very much deeper topic, right, that we don't need to get into today. I don't think that's the point. But I guess the point is today, believe, because it's real, right? I am by no means done on my healing journey, but I'm at a point now where I can feel comfortable sitting in front of you and not be in pain. And for a long time, when I did this, when I went live, when I spoke to anybody, I was in pain, like real pain. And I lied to myself in those moments and told myself I was fine and I was already healed because I so desperately wanted to be. I was so done with this process, that I wanted to force it, be healed. But the years and years and years of pain that I had suffered, the trauma that I had experienced it deserved its own time to heal, however long that took. And I did not, over my life, give myself credit for the amount of healing I had to do. It's not until now that I've really recognized how much it was. This is something that the world is not designed to allow people to heal. Because we think that you can take a vacation, or that's how the modern professional world's set up. You can take a 2-week vacation and somehow that's going to heal you. Right? And somehow that 2 weeks of rest is going to reinvigorate you enough to come back and put the pedal to the grindstone again. Metal to the grindstone. But in reality, what I've found is, and that's what I assumed too, when I stopped doing lives about a year ago frequently, I was telling myself I was going to take a couple-week break because I needed to rest up. Give me 1 second. Let me blow my nose first so I stop wiping it. All right, that's better. So I told myself I was going to take a couple-week break, and that turned into over a year, right? And it's funny because the way that process worked internally, there's a dialogue that's going on this whole time between me and what I could describe for you as like my guides, right? The way I experience them, it's like my family. All of the family members that I've known that have passed away, and even some that I've never met, they've formed over these last 5 to 10 years like a cohort that surrounds me all the time. And I can always feel them there, and I can always hear them talking to me. Even in the moments when I'm really lost and I'm really angry and I'm losing myself, I can still now feel them. And it was these energies that were talking to me, were telling me, take a break, Chris, rest. It's these people that care about me. This is the energy. I was like, take a rest. And so I was like, okay. But they're like, just take a couple of weeks off. And I was like, okay, I can do that. the funny thing is like they know me better than I know myself. So they almost tricked me into doing this for a year, because it was like I would do 2 weeks and then I'd be sitting there like, do I feel good? And they'd be like, do you feel good? And I'd be like, well, no, not really. And he's like, well, take another couple weeks. And so I take another couple weeks and check back in. And I did that for a year, you know. And so now, as that progressed, I would get frustrated. I'd have little episodes, tower moments, explode and get frustrated, scream at them, cuss them out, and all that kind of stuff, right? Get impatient. But then slowly I started to realize, oh, this is working. I'm not stuck anymore. The pain that I was feeling, I was going in circles for so long and it wasn't getting better, but I was convincing myself it was. And it wasn't until I actually stopped for like 6 months. It took that long before I really started to recognize this part, where it was like, oh, the healing process requires time. There's no way around it. There's no like, go to the right resort or the right retreat and you can do it in a quicker period of time. The time it's going to take is the time it's going to take. And unless you decide to sacrifice that amount of time, you're not going to heal. That's the truth. Simply put. And what often happens for people on the awakening journey is the demands of life become so extreme that they have to pull themselves out of that healing process before they can actually heal. But because we want to be healed, as I did, we will tell ourselves we've finished the process and we'll go on about our lives. But then when we start to have tripping points again, we'll wonder what the hell's going on. Nothing's working right again, but I already healed myself. If that's you, if that's something you've experienced, that's why I'm here, is to explain that to you. That's why. It's because you're being asked or guided to take the time you need, and there is no time frame on that. It could be 6 months, it could be 3 years. And I mean that. And you need to be ready to allow yourself that time and to do whatever you need to do in that time to enable that. But that is the priority. Not making more money, not getting a house, not getting a nicer car, not going on a vacation. Because in truth, the vacation isn't doing anything for you. It's causing you to feel like you have to work harder to earn it, right? And then you get there and you can't relax because you're worried about all the stresses from the job that you had to have to earn the money to go on the vacation, right? This is a cycle that's designed very specifically to keep you running. So choose something else. And I know, trust me, I know how hard that choice is because I've been living it for the last 5 years. I have had as little as I could possibly imagine to still survive for the last 5 years. I make next to no money, right, as I've tried to do this, as I've tried to get this off the ground, and that's okay, because it's not about the money. It's another lesson that I've learned in this process. The money comes when it's needed, right? The universe provides when you need it, and the only way you learn that lesson is through trusting it enough, not thinking that you have to go out and grind to get something to provide for yourself. You know, Jesus has a parable about this in the Bible, and I always paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, if all of the grass in the fields and all of the flowers and the trees don't worry about where their next meal is going to come from, why are you worrying about it? And it's this idea that we're disconnected from the world, like we're somehow different from the tree. You know, we all come from the same thing, the same place. We live on the earth. This is our home. We come out of it, right? It provides for us when we enter in that relationship properly and we trust it. But when we abuse the thing that we came from, when we ignore it, we force ourselves into a desert of sorts in which it makes it look like we have to do everything. Like we have to work so that we have something to eat, right? So many of the stories in the Bible, in the New and the Old Testament, are about this kind of trust, about trusting, even sometimes literally for food, where it speaks about the need for faith, that it's a practical thing, that when you believe and trust in the divine source, whatever you want to call that, something bigger than yourself, it will provide for you. And I mean practically. I've had this. Here's an example of how this has happened for me in my life. There was a period of time a couple of years back, almost exactly 2 years ago. Thank you, Manatees. Appreciate any of you for the gifts too. I really appreciate it because this is how I make my money. the job that I was doing Instacart up until this point just decided to restrict my account yesterday, as a matter of fact. So this is how I'm making money now. So I appreciate your donations, guys. I appreciate all of your gifts, because it is very helpful for me. It helps support me. But that being said, this is a hard process to go through, right? And it takes a long time for us to build up the courage and the confidence to walk down that path. But the story that I was going to share was about 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago yesterday, actually. I think it was on July 4th, 2 years ago. I had just got out of a really bad relationship. It was about a 1.5 year relationship. I was engaged to be married, and it was the most abusive relationship I could ever imagine anybody being in, not even just myself, but very unhealthy. And I had just figured out a way to escape that, right? But I had only escaped with myself. I had lost everything else, right? Every dime that I'd ever had was gone, right? Even most of my things were damaged or torn. They were just, everything was reset. And I had come back home to my parents' house, where I am now, because I had nowhere else to go. And they were gracious enough to let me stay here for this period of time. And I had to get food, but I didn't have any money because I had just spent my last money to get food for the kids and her, right? So I had no money, and I had used my food stamps for that same reason. And so I was going to the grocery store. I had worked at the time DoorDash to get enough money to go get a couple groceries, and I went to Walmart, and I had, I think, $20 or $25, and I was like, okay, we can do a lot with this at Walmart, right? So I was strategizing, like, what do we do? What do we get so that we can get enough food for this period of time? And I'm broken at the same time. I'm emotionally broken from what just happened. So I'm just hoping that this works. In that end of rope point where you're just like, please, just not one more thing, And I had picked out what I thought I could pay for, and I had gotten to the self-checkout. I started to check out, and I got about halfway through what I was rigging up, and I realized I had gotten too much, and I wasn't going to be able to pay for it. And I was like, oh, fuck. And so I started to grab the stuff to put it back in the cart. And right as I was like about to break down, this lady next to me walked up to me. She walked up to me at the very moment where I was done. I was done. You know what I mean? And she said, hey, let me buy that for you. And I didn't even know. I started to cry immediately. And I was like, thank you. Like, I can pay this much of it. I have this much of it. And she's like, no. Don't worry about it. Just get what you need. And it kind of took all of the energy I had at the moment just to thank her, because I was so overwhelmed with the experience. But it was proof for me of what I'm talking about. This was the vindication of faith in real time for me, where I had left that relationship based on trust, that I was doing it because I had been gaslit like a motherfucker. I thought that I was the worst human being in the world at that point in time, and I was trying everything to make that relationship work. And I finally realized and had the courage to say, no, that's not me. I'm good, and I'm gonna go and show you that by myself, But in order to do that, I had to trust, because I had nothing, that there was going to be something there to catch me, And there was. But that doesn't work if you have a safety net there for yourself. If you have a backup plan. I had no backup plan. You know what I mean? And that's just one example. There's been other examples of things like that happening. But it's always stunning and miraculous and magic when it happens. It's magic. It's what they write about in the Bible, right? That lady healed a part of me when she did that. She probably has no idea how meaningful that was to me, but something new acted through her in that very moment that I needed it. And so there's experiences that you can have in life that they're just for you. even though I'm sharing this with you, it doesn't do it justice. It's something that you will have to experience for yourself for you to really get that solidified feeling of, oh, I really believe this. You have to see it. And somebody can't give that to you. But what we want in this world is somebody to kind of do that for us. Please give me that thing that I know is there, but I can't see. Where is it? You gotta trust that it's there, and then it'll show itself to you. Right? But you have to form that relationship with it first. Or else it doesn't know who you are. Right? It doesn't know how to help you because you don't recognize it's there. Blow my nose again. I swear. I cry so much when I'm doing these things, it's insane. Oh, that's better. Anyway, but I hope that story kind of brings some hope to you if you're in a place where you feel that way at all. Because I promise you that there is something there to catch you. And that moment that we all dread, where there's no other backup plan, there's nothing else out there and nothing's coming to save us. Like, that moment is the exact moment where you'll learn that truth, if you believe in it. But what often will happen is that how terrifying that can be, that period of time that you have to spend in that no man's land, can be so terrifying that as soon as we get close to it, we habitually try to escape it. So we'll grab onto some other plan, some other backup before we get there. And so we keep ourselves from having that experience oftentimes, right? So don't do that to yourself. It's a hard choice to not make, you know what I mean? It's not something you usually see happening, but it is something that if you're aware of, that's the journey that you're on, that you're walking towards, that's the end point you're trying to get to, you'll get there. It's just a process. It takes a long time. Anyway, let me see what we got for questions. Thank you for all the support, guys, and all the messages and stuff. This is awesome. Let me see if I can catch up on some of them. I see you too, brother. Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Thank you, Red. I appreciate that. Mindy, hey, are you still in here? I hope you are. It's good to see you. Thanks for being a supporter. I appreciate you. Let's see. Let me just catch up because I missed a bunch of them. Apologies if I missed any of those comments. Robbie says, done that, been there. It's humbling. Yeah, absolutely it is. And that's, the process of being humbled is actually, like, if you're honest with yourself, if you allow yourself to go through it, is an enjoyable thing. But we avoid the process. But it kind of feels good to be humbled. And this is a weird thing we don't usually talk about. But you have to really think about the moments in which somebody has really, like, if you've been out of line or you've been doing something that was untrue and somebody in the right way stops that, like, because they really don't want you to do something incorrect, and gives you the truth in that moment, right? That humility that it creates, that experience is something that's very, very pleasant, because it takes a lot of pressure off of you. You know what I mean? All of the pressure of all of the assumptions that we made up until that point that weren't true, And so it can be, that's why it's invigorating to some degree, and why we get taught over the awakening process to exude humility, right? Because you learn that most of the mistakes you've made throughout your life have been a product of arrogance, right? Ignoring the truth in front of you in favor of control, right? And so if you intentionally try to act on the ideas and thoughts that would demonstrate humility, you will be keeping yourself close to the path that you're supposed to walk. Maybe not always on it, but close. Right? And that can also go the wrong way. We can try to humble ourselves to a degree that we reduce our humanity to nothing, and then we become kind of a amorphous blob where there's nothing interesting about us, you know? So there's a balance there. You know examples of people like this. You know, a lot of times when people become awakened, they can trip into that because there's an opportunity to kind of, once you reach nirvana, you can kind of escape into it. There's nothing to worry about anymore, right? So there's nothing to really do, right? There's no point to doing anything. There's no point to trying to impress anybody. So you can kind of just, like, if you want to, pull back and watch. And I do think that's why a lot of, you know, gurus and stuff have this quality of being kind of just there. You might notice that, like, they won't interact a lot. They'll say things, but they'll say things that are very powerful with just like, but there and then done. You know what I mean? I think that's wise because a large part of the time, like, you know, if you reach that state, there's no point to it. So you just don't have the energy. It's like, why would I expend energy to say something in this conversation or whatever it is? You know what I mean? I'm feeling great where I'm at, you know? And oftentimes the only times those people do speak at length is to describe how to get to where they're at, right? Not to fight with anybody or to argue, because they already know the truth. I can't convince you of anything. You're convinced of what you believe. So believe it all the way until you don't, right? Like, you got to go that path, like, by yourself. But there is a truth, and it's attainable, and I'll be right here when you get there. You know, that's kind of that kind of energy, you know? So, anyway, I don't know, interesting download, but super stories. Why you look like Jesus? I get that a lot. I really do. And it's very humbling, actually, to have people recognize that kind of a figure through me in any way. Because I'm quite obviously not Jesus, right? I'm Christopher Turner. But I can't explain why. I can go into a little bit of depth of why that happens and why people often ask me that question, and why you may see it with other people, why other people have that quality. And I think the reason is because, and I think it depends on what path along the awakening process you take, because there's different versions of it, right? There's, like, it's kind of obvious. There's the Buddhist version, there's the Hindu version, there's the Christian version. There's these different ways of getting to what we would call enlightenment. But in the Christian version, the path is literally outlined by the story of Jesus, right? The path to enlightenment is mapped out through the New Testament in the story of Jesus. And so if you want to become enlightened, that's why it's been so powerful throughout history, is because what Christianity gave people was something not different in like a fundamental sense from what Buddhism and Hinduism is giving. It's just more of like how you define the figures and how you think about it. But the actual path and what happens to the individual being along that process is actually fairly similar. But it wasn't illustrated very well in Buddhism and in Hinduism. Like I said, because you have this problem where once people get there, they kind of don't have a motivation to make people come along. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it was hard to get anybody to describe or to have an accurate description of how you go along the process, which is why if you try to go, you know, study at a Buddhist temple, the process is very frustrating. They're not going to tell you the secret. You go find the secret yourself. And the way they do that is actually through kind of actively fucking with you, tricking you, playing games on you mentally so that you actually learn that you're the one playing the game. It's this kind of thing, but it's very unenunciated. So I think it's turned a lot of people away throughout history because, you know, one, people don't want to be tricked, they want to be played with, they don't want to be made fun of, they don't want to go through all of these things, and so they attribute those processes to kind of despotic people, I think, or people that are trying to control them, or whatever it is. So there was a necessity for somebody else to describe the path in a way that was more attainable to the average human being. And I believe that that's why Jesus came, right? Is because, and why this is so confusing modern day is because modern Christianity has perverted the message of Jesus. And what I mean by that is they've taken one of the most fundamental teachings of the Bible and forgotten it, and then applied that sin to Jesus. Let me explain. One of the fundamental problems in the Old Testament of the Bible is when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments. He comes down with these 10 Commandments that have just been delivered directly from God of how a person should live, a good human being should act. It's more of a description of what a good human being is, so that people have an idea, oh, that's what it is, because they were so lost they had no idea anymore. And so he comes down from the mountain and they're worshiping a golden calf. And they kind of reverted to their old gods, right? And they've made an idol out of this thing. And one of the fundamental teachings from that story is that thou shalt not hold any idols above me, this kind of idea, right? That you should not worship anything else besides the idea of God, right? But if you make that into anything else, and then you worship that thing, what you're doing is the same thing that all of these old religions were doing throughout history. You're turning that object into God. And then that perverts the whole message. It actually manipulates you and will turn you into a nasty thing unintentionally, slowly over time. So, what I believe Jesus did was recognizing this, that there was a confusion on how to be a good person, and how to walk this path, how to wake up to the truth at all, that he had to demonstrate that you could walk that path, so actively do it through his life, and still be a human being, and specifically not be divine, right? Not call yourself God, right? I believe that the whole message of Jesus Christ, I truly believe this wholeheartedly, was to show the human being what it actually is, what it's capable of, like I started this live. That you're a magic thing. You truly are. You have a sixth sense that acts that way, that every other human being has as well, that makes us all interconnected. The only way to demonstrate that to people, that that's true, is to live it yourself. But the problem is, once you start to live it, you start to demonstrate those magical qualities of the human being. If nobody else is doing that because they don't understand it yet, they'll think you're the king. And they'll start to worship you. And that's exactly what you're trying to have them avoid. Right? Why didn't Jesus walk around asking everybody to bow down in front of him? Yet that's what we do on Sunday. Right? I believe that that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the teachings of Jesus Christ, a manipulation of it, specifically, that's been used throughout history to control people. Right? Because the truth is that energy, that Christ energy, is universal. Because he was a human being, he is the same thing as you. There was nothing different about Jesus from you. That's the truth. That's what's so beautiful about it. You don't have to change anything about you. You don't have to be born from somebody else. Jesus was a human being, and so are you. And what does that mean? Everything that Jesus did, you can be. You have the capacity to be. As a matter of fact, that's what you should be. And I think when people, if people say those things like Jesus, or like he said, why do you look like Jesus? The reason you recognize that energy is because it's a universal energy. Once you understand the truth that I just explained to you, that energy works with you. It becomes you. Right? Because it was human. It is human being. So all you're seeing, when we say I see Jesus in you, you're seeing true humanity in that individual. You're not seeing the individual Jesus. You're seeing a human being actually realized in front of you, right? And that is, and you can see that with many people throughout the world, right? It's happening more and more. And that's why they say that Jesus is a bifurcated energy, right? It's because of the way we've talked about this figure and the way that we've worshipped this figure as an idol that's led us astray. Right? I do not believe that Jesus ever wanted that or would ever have asked for that. And I actually think it's kind of comical when you take yourself to that place and think about it. Like the figure that we associate with Jesus and all of the works that he did and the kind of person that he was, could you ever imagine that thing wanting you to kneel in front of it? He washed other people's feet. It's like the exact opposite of that. Yet when you go to church, when you go to most of the Christian churches, what you'll hear is Jesus every other word. The word has been made into an idol itself. The name itself has been made into an idol, so that everything is through Jesus, right? But that's a lie. There's nothing happening through Jesus. It's always through you, through the human being. Maybe through the example of Jesus, by walking the path that he initiated, absolutely. But he's not doing it for you, and that's a shame that you would give somebody else credit, even Jesus Christ, credit for the work that you're doing, right? For the person that you're going to become. That unique thing, because it'll be different than Jesus, but just as beautiful, if it's actually realized, right? I believe that's the message that he wants to bring, you know, and I think anybody can tap into that as soon as they want to, right? Thank you, Mindy. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely, Mr. High. Oh, what's up, dude? Good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. One of the Ascended Masters. I agree. Let's see here. Mosby asked, do you believe that Trump is the second coming of Jesus Christ? No, I don't. I kind of explained why right there, right? I don't believe anybody is. Not in that way. Not in the way that Christians have professed that Jesus Christ is coming back to save them. Because again, take what I just explained, right? It's not about the figure. And Jesus wasn't coming to save humanity when he came in that way, in the way that it's talked about. He was bringing an example of how humanity saves itself. That requires us to do the work, not him. Right? But somehow we've flipped that around and said Jesus is going to come back and fix all of the shit that we did here. Again, a second time. What? No. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think so. You are free to believe that, and I don't mean to belittle anybody's beliefs by any means. But I just find that a little bit illogical. You know? I believe that, you know, you have a capacity inside of you that is so expansive that it's intimidating to you, not anybody else. The reason that you hide it is because you're scared of it, right? You're scared of how much you could be if you let yourself be it. But the reason we don't do it is because it demands a lot of you. It demands that you stop doing the things that you're doing right now that you know are holding you or keeping you from that. And you already know what those are because they're popping in your head as soon as I say it, aren't they? Right? Your angels and guides are always working with you, and they're the ones bringing that up in your head. Because we're on the topic right now, right? It's not me doing it. The universe is always working with you, and you do the work. You have the responsibility, right? And the world is not going to be saved. I can promise you that by any one figure, right? As divine as they could be or not. Because that would be antithetical to the entire design of the system, right? Why would you design a system that you needed to design a savior to fix? Why wouldn't you just fix the system to begin with? I believe the system is exactly fine the way it is. It's always been that way. I believe that we've misunderstood what the rules of it are for quite a while now. And that once we realign with the actual rules, the laws of karma, these fundamental truths, right? What we realize is there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to fix in the world. God did a pretty good job. I mean, just nailed it. The problem is we don't know the intent of this. We think that we don't. That's one of the fundamental questions of life: is what is the point of life, right? Yeah, in these moments where we see all this chaos and this suffering, this anger, and the worst parts of humanity, we question why God would make such a horrible place. We use that as proof, evidence that it needs to be fixed, right? But that assumes that the purpose of this is just would be to experience like heaven, right? If we eliminated all of the pain and all of the stuff we associated with nastiness in the world and we fixed that part, what would make this place different than what we associate with heaven? The place where God resides, right? So you ask yourself, why did God create this place? Don't you want something different? What, are you just going to make a heaven too? You know what I mean? Why? Nobody's going to watch that movie. And that is kind of the secret, I think. That's the truth. Why does this exist? Well, kind of because. Why not? It's better than not. It's better than just heaven. So, we have this. And that's the simplest way you could try to explain why this is here. But even in that very simple, kind of almost childish explanation, you see that there's nothing to change. You know what I mean? There's absolutely nothing to change. If you want to get it from a motivational level, we can do. I do this quite a bit because I love the thought experiment. But just try to place yourself in the position of God, which I think is funny. Most people have never done that. Never tried to think like, what would it be like to be God, right? Why? Well, because most religions tell you that's a bad thing to do. Never put yourself in the position of God, right? That's audacious. Well, what if the secret is you're a piece of God? So the only way you understand God is to try to understand it, right? If you never place yourself in the shoes of God, you'll never understand why He made this, why it made this, right? He is not an accurate description, why it made this. I think the reason why, and you have to simplify, right? It's a meditation you can go through. But if you really try to place yourself in God's shoes, what is something that God doesn't have? You know? And you've probably heard this question asked before. What is something that God doesn't have? And the answer that I've always gotten is limitation, right? God isn't limited. By default, God is everything, right? God is it. So the one thing it didn't have by default is a limitation of something, something it couldn't see, right? It could see everything because it was everything. So I believe there was an innate loneliness inspired by this. Imagine, right? If you're everything, you can see everything. There's nothing else to see it with you. Think about that. You're God, you're everything. There's no other God sitting there saying, hey man, how you doing? Right? I think that the most fundamental human experience, the most fundamental human pain is loneliness. You can prove this to yourself. If you don't believe me, isolate yourself for long enough and then have a conversation about it, right? Because most of us keep us habitually entertained in the world, distracted, so you never feel the pain of loneliness. You convince yourself that you're a good enough human being that you don't have to feel that kind of pain, right? People like you enough. But if you ever actually do sit in that pain for a long time, like I have, I've definitely experienced that one, you'll feel exactly how deep of a pain it is and how it will rip you apart at the seams, every aspect of you. And as I sat in that feeling, I started to contemplate this question. And that's what made me realize that I believed that God was trying to show me something, right? The truth about its experience. That it also wants to be heard, right? It's not just you that wants to be seen. The reason you want to be seen and heard is because you're a piece of God, the thing that made you, and it wants to be seen and heard. It's lonely. That's why it made you. That's why it made all of this. I want something else. So what do? I have to cut myself in half. I'm everything. How do I make something else? Well, right down the middle. Now I don't know what that other part of me is doing. I can't even see it anymore. It's separate. What automatically happens as soon as you do that? What is it doing? Is it going to hurt me? Does it love me still? As soon as you make that first division, the concept of evil enters. Of danger. Of violence. Right? Of stealing. Of all of these and it's just a byproduct of not seeing everything. As soon as you want to fix that lonely problem, now we have this other one. Right? If I don't want to be lonely, I have to have something that I can't control. But if I can't control something, it has the possibility to hurt me. It's that simple. Right? Why does pain exist in the world? That's why. If you wanted to fix it, you'd have to delete everything. And I mean everything. That's why God doesn't fix it. That's why Jesus isn't coming to save anything. Right? Because there's nothing to save. There's nothing to fix. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. It is evolving, and that is one thing that I will say, that I believe that this is an experiment of sorts. As I described before, I don't think God really knows exactly what's happening, which is why we have free will. You know, I think God can see it, but it's not moving the pieces. That's why we have free will. And so it's almost like a movie of sorts, where the cast members write the script. And the director has to let them do their thing, right? It can't interfere, or else it destroys the entire thing, right? It reveals the whole secret. That's why God doesn't interact, right? That's why God's not fixing your problem for you. Even though it wishes it could, it wishes it didn't have a necessity to have that there. That's why. So you can forgive you can release some of the frustration, the anger that we have at God for why you've done this to me. Why you've made me feel this way. Why do I feel so fucking alone in this world, right? That's why. Because you're closer to me now. Right? Now you understand what I feel. And now we can truly understand each other. That's what God's trying to do with the entire human race. Right? And if that process takes place and actually happens, which I believe it is actually happening, that's what we'll end at. A unification with what created us, with what we come from, and an actualization of the human being to a level that we could not imagine. It would make sci-fi look ridiculous, childish. I do believe that's what you have to look forward to as a human being, modern day. So I hope that is uplifting if any of this has been overwhelming for any of you, because I know it is. These concepts are big, they're really uncomfortable, and some of them, like I've been confronted, like the conceptions of Jesus, these are things that are very deeply held. And I want you to know that if you do, any of you, whatever religion you practice, whatever church you go to, I'm not trying to keep you from doing that. Please continue to go and enjoy whatever community you find resonance in, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the only thing I would say is, do not, just because you're a member of that group, accept everything that group prescribes. Because it is one of the things that limits human beings. When we get in groups, we try to think together, all the same. And that limits you. You're specific. You are what you are for a reason, and you need to say everything you're seeing with as much truth as you can so that we can figure out what's going on here. Because if you don't do that, what we'll produce is more of that chaos and pain, more of that unknown by default, right? As soon as we hide, as soon as we lie, we produce that chaos in the world. And so if the world is a chaotic place, that's why human beings are lying. Simple as that, right? And that's true. That's kind of obvious, right? It's being made more obvious every day. Super Stories asks, how do we believe the Bible if it has been revised so many times by so many different people? That's a good question. As a matter of fact, I really like that question, Super Stories, because I think it actually gets down to some of the most amazing parts of the Bible is actually exactly what you just asked. You have to kind of think of it in a different way, right? You can think of it in the way of there's been all of these different separate people that are writing their own versions of a story, right? So you can think of it like a game of telephone where it's getting muddied as it's going along the way. Or you could flip that and you can think of it as this many people, all of these people throughout history, and you have to think of how much energy it took to write a book. Throughout history. This is something that would take devotion to learn to write and then also to write a book, right? This would be a devotion of your life, one of the works of your life. To have that many people all focusing on the same story, right? And then all trying to narrate that story, giving their own version of it. What the Bible is a combination of all of these different revisions, absolutely, and you're 100% correct. The interesting thing is that even with all of the revision, there's a cohesive story that goes along that still references itself, right? So all of those different individual people, as they were writing, were referencing each other's work as they were doing that writing. So that's one of the reasons why you can trust it a little more than the modern kind of story would lead you to believe. It's because these people weren't doing this work independently. They weren't like one on another, like kind of like a scientist would, rebutting the work of the previous scholar. No, they were taking the work of the previous scholar and expanding on it, right? Bringing their own perspective, like I said, their own unique flavor into that story. And I truly believe that the reason it's needed and the reason you shouldn't fear it in the Bible is because to properly tell the human story, which is what the Bible is, it's a story of human beings, of how we came to be and what we are and how we will develop. You have to tap more than one person, right? If Jesus wrote the Bible, it wouldn't be enough. Even Jesus, right? You need to have more than one perspective on the problem. And this is just my opinion. I could be wrong at this, but I believe the reason why you see so many revisions in the Bible is because this is what people are trying to do. They're trying to distill down the fundamentals of what's being taught, because there are so many people looking at it at the same time. So if these people can all agree on these 4, 5, 6 principles, then that must be true, right? And that must be true. So maybe the best thing I could say is do not trust the Bible blindly, because there are going to be parts of it that are not accurate in the way we would think about or facts, right? But there's also massive portions of that are so fundamentally true that it can reinvigorate your understanding of truth itself. That's how true it is, right? So it's very, you have to do your own, you have to walk your own journey through that book. That's also why it's so important. That's why it's the most printed book throughout history. That's why it's the most popular book throughout history, right? It's because there is something magical about that book, the combining of all of those different perspectives to tell the same story. That's incredible. That's never happened before or since, right? So, I mean, how else do we describe those things? There's proof in the act itself, in the creation of the thing itself, that demonstrates the miraculous nature of the work, right? Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Abel says Trump will be the good guy first and the Antichrist, then Jesus comes. And I respect your beliefs for sure. I don't agree necessarily, you know. I don't know what's coming in that way. I can't see that far in the future. I have no idea. I have feelings about tides. You know, it's more like you can feel the ebbs and flows happening, and that there's a tendency that this could be the way that things are going in the future. But I would say, and I don't mean to belittle you at all, Abel, by saying that, but anybody that does say they know exactly what's going to happen in the future, I wouldn't trust, right? Because you're a human being just like they are, right? And no human being can see the future in totality. Right? The whole purpose of this thing is to kind of surprise us, to be unpredictable. But as human beings, we constantly want to predict what's going to happen, right? I do the same thing all the time. Right? So it's not, again, Abel, I'm not just speaking to you. But be careful with prediction, right? Because the world is a shifting place. I've learned this. Like I don't think it's really the most accurate way to talk about. It assumes that time is linear, right? It assumes that the way that we perceive the world is the way that the universe works, and I don't think that's true. I don't think time is linear. I don't think time exists at all. I think it's an illusion based on the place that we're in, this creation, right? And the way that we view the world, kind of an inside-out nature, it makes us think that everything's linear, so that there's a progression to that line, so that there's time, so that we age, right? But so that there's a future and a past. But different dimensions of reality, I truly believe, don't have that same kind of constriction, right? So that there's more like intermingling energies, and how they mesh and mix will determine the constitution of the future, right? What it's constituted of in the future. And so it's almost like so complicated, that process, that trying to predict what it will produce after the fact is almost like comical. You know what I mean? Because it's like inevitably gonna make you look bad. You know, inevitably. Even like the best predictors in the world, Nostradamus and what was his name, Edgar Cayce, right? These people were wrong in different ways. Because they have been right in so many different ways, we tend to overlook the predictions that were like blatantly wrong, right? But they were, in a lot of ways, right? They weren't omniscient. And so This is actually one thing that you can find in the spiritual community to be very aware of and very weary of. Anybody that presents themselves as if they know all. I can promise you they don't. I can promise you that. They're trying to pretend to be that so that you trust them, so that you give them money. Right? It's as simple as that. It's the same thing as a snake oil salesman. They have to be confident enough to make you think that what they're selling you is actually real. Right? I'm not saying that magic isn't real, or that tarot isn't real, or that any of this, like witchcraft, isn't real. It very, very, very much is. I can promise you that. But what I'm talking about is the people that try to pretend. And there's a lot of them. Because the process of learning how to do those things and what that world is really made up of is long. I just described it can take a decade. It's taken a decade for me. And maybe I'm just slow, but I don't think so. Right? So the problem is when you have, 18, 19-year-old kids trying to give advice on life, there hasn't been enough time to understand it practically, right? And so the way that we'll go about trying to convince you that I know all is through convincing you that there's some secret that I found that you didn't see, right? That I figured out, and now you have to trust me and give me all your money, right? By the way, with a very convenient angel number progression, pay me $22.22 so you feel good about it. You know what I mean? I don't mean to talk bad about that entire industry, but I am frustrated by it, because one, it's an industry that I am a part of to some degree, because I do that same thing. I do readings, I don't charge money for it, and if people want to pay me for it, cool, and I do need to figure out a way to make money at some point, but the whole point wasn't the money. The point why I'm sitting in front of you is because I really like saying these things. If you couldn't tell, I really enjoy talking, and I like saying what I believe out loud, and so I want to do that as much as I can, and if that's valuable, somebody will pay me for that, right? I believe that. I have faith that that will happen, but I can't get that the other way around, right? By making it into a business and then convincing myself that the reason I'm doing the business is for altruistic purposes. No, a business is designed to make money. If that's the first stop on the train, then what you're doing is making money, not helping people, right? There's a priority issue there, right? As soon as everybody tries to jump into this and make money in their own way, and I understand, I've gone through all of those steps. The reason I'm critical of it is I've been tempted by it at times, right? And I've chosen to not go down those roads for these reasons. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there that are very talented that deserve to be paid for what they do, right? Who are mediums or psychics or tarot readers or whatever. They definitely exist. I've experienced them myself. It's just they are few and far between because it is a very difficult process. You have to think of it like the kind of training that this is going to sound silly, but this is genuinely to try to illustrate the difficulty spiritually to actually get to a point where you can do that kind of healing work for somebody. Traditionally, this was a shaman, right? In older societies, the people that did these kind of things were shaman. Most people didn't because it took too much of them, right? It demanded too much of them. And the shaman it was a sacrifice to be that person in a society. You usually didn't get to be a member of the society as a shaman. You were outside. Specifically because you would be influenced by everybody if you stayed with them. So you'd go live by yourself, which is why shaman and witch doctors and stuff have this association with being the crazy guy out in the woods. That's why, is because they were intentionally sent to the woods so that they could actually be one with what's true and bring that truth back into the tribe, because the tribe's going to confuse itself constantly, right? Imagine what it feels like to have to be cast out from the only society you know, and to live your entire life alone, with your only job being helping that society that has cast you out, right? That's the sacrifice, that you're making. I will be the outcast so that the society survives. It takes that kind of person. Which is why I ask you, when you see page after page of tarot reading, do you really think those people have gone through that kind of sacrifice? That kind of contemplation? And I promise you, if they have, you'll see it right away. There's a big difference. A big difference between those people and the people that haven't. But if you are trying to learn more about this stuff or break into the spiritual world, I don't mean to discourage you at all. Explore it, right? And have fun with it. That would be my suggestion. Just because a lot of people are kind of on their own journey and learning how to be spiritual teachers, selling that product before it's ready, I guess is the best way to put it, right? It's not that they're not going to do that or be that, or they don't have those abilities. It's that you're kind of selling the fruit before it's ripe, and so people aren't really going to get the best quality product. So what you can do, especially in these next couple years, because everybody's going through this awakening process, so it's going to take some time for people to get out of their crazy, you know what I mean? In this next couple years, enjoy it. Treat it more as entertainment, genuinely. Most readings, that's what you should do. This is for entertainment purposes, right? If it doesn't bring a smile on your face, right? If it doesn't make you feel good about yourself, why are you watching it, right? Scroll on. If it is a message that is you need, right? If it's a message that isn't going to be fun, it will be delivered in exactly the way that you need. You will know those messages when they come across your feed, because it will be in exactly the right words so that you don't lose your temper, so that you don't throw the phone across the room, right? You can tell when a message that you don't want to hear is being delivered exactly so that you will listen. But you can also tell when somebody's just trying to fluff you up, when somebody's trying to, or somebody's projecting, when one of these people, because one of the things that also happens as you go through the awakening process is you'll get these moments of frustration, these tower moments. And if you're not careful, if you've already started practicing teaching or selling readings, you will project what you're going through out onto the people that you're trying to help. And I've seen this happen quite often. A lot of the readings that you see, especially the ones that are more malicious, that talk negatively about other people, that talk about other people thinking about them, you know what I mean? Like, oh, these people are constantly they're constantly thinking about you, and they're so jealous of you, and they're so bad. These are projections from the very person that's giving you the reading. It should show you exactly how shallow they are and the space that they're in. That's what they're projecting. That's what they think will make them feel better, is having other people look at them in that way, or whatever they're saying, right? And again, you can enjoy those still. Like, it can still be kind of fun, you know what I mean? But you make sure you know that. Make sure that you understand that that's what's going on, that they're not actually saying the truth. They're projecting their anger out on the world, and they're doing it in a way where other people will watch them do it and reward them for it. That's why. Right? And so you can actually, and a lot of readers get stuck at that point, specifically, because that's addicting. You know what I mean? Because it does. People's shadow will resonate with that. If I'm fucking mad and I go out there and just start ranting about, my ex-fiance and everything that she did to me and how she treated me, I guarantee you I'll have thousands of views on YouTube tomorrow, right? Of other people traumatized in the exact same way, sitting there saying, yeah, fuck those people, right? What do you see happening? How do most people get big in social media? It's very simple. It's not a brilliant thing. It doesn't take a long time to figure out that all you're doing is picking the traumas that people have, the same ones that you have, and allowing yourself to rant like a raving lunatic until enough people fucking watch you do it, right? If you end up going down that path, if you fall victim, that's a certain type of deal with the devil you're making, because it may give you what you want in the moment, the eyeballs, the kind of gratification of venting and having other people vindicate what you're saying. But in the long run, you won't actually solve the problem, because you're not allowing yourself to go deep enough to figure out what you're doing wrong. You're projecting that out onto the other person, place, or thing. And so eventually you will circle back around to that same decision. You won't see it because you didn't realize you made a problem, and you'll trip over the same fucking hill. And then you'll get angrier the next time, and you'll do it again, and you'll keep just until you spiral down into a version of yourself that you absolutely hate. And once you're there, now we're ready to start really working. You know what I mean? So that's a spiral that you're going to see a lot of people on, that are currently on today as we speak. As soon as you stop watching this, you'll flip and you'll see somebody spiraling, pretending like they're not. Right? Don't get caught in that. Don't be convinced that person is the person you should follow, because like that old saying, or how do you approach a person that's drowning? Feet first, right? So that you can push them away, because somebody that's drowning is literally about to die, and so they're going to grab onto anything else, and they will sacrifice you so that they can get a gulp of air, right? That's what you're seeing in a lot of social media nowadays. That's what you're seeing people go through, because we're all so fucking lonely and isolated since COVID and all of this stuff. And the breakdown of male and female relationships, right? I mean, nobody's engaging within each other anymore. And we're all hyper depressed and hyper lonely and hyper isolated and all pretending like everything's okay, you know? Not in the world, like everybody's kind of recognizing, yeah, the world's shit. But in our own personal lives, still in our little kind of like social media picture box, we're still presenting as if it's 2008, 2000, 1995, right? And we're just happy-go-lucky and everything's good to go. And we've got the whole world figured out, you know? But the people that are the worst at this right now are the political commentators. Oh my God. I'm getting so frustrated with them. And I'm going to be doing some episodes, some podcast episodes. For those of you that don't follow the podcast, I do podcast episodes all the time, these kind of topics. So follow me. It's called the Unfounded podcast. It's out on all platforms. But there's been so many conservative, specifically conservative media platforms that have become popular over the last 4 years, and rightfully so, because there has been so much state-run control of free speech over the last 4 years that a lot of these conservative movements have latched onto the free speech narrative and used it to boost their platforms, right, and to get in front of eyes. And again, rightfully so, because it is what's been needed. We need to speak out against the restriction of free speech. It's a fundamental principle in the United States. It's something we need to defend. The problem is I'm starting to recognize that most of the people that are defending these principles, right, free speech, I don't think they actually believe in them. You know, I'm actually starting to realize they don't. It's not like a question. Like, I'm recognizing actively that almost none of these people believe in the principles that they say that they're defending, free speech, you know, these kind of justice, these kind of ideas, because they're, you know, flipping very quickly, right? I've been disillusioned. I think I'm still a registered Democrat, actually, but I'm by no means liberal anymore. I was when I went through college, and I kind of went through a whole awakening process through that as well. But I became disillusioned with the Liberal Party around when Trump got elected, because I was no fan of Trump, and I was kind of losing my mind after the 2020 election, or the 2016 election, and I really didn't want to lose my mind anymore. And what I recognized is that the hatred that I was feeling and that was being gestated towards Trump was something that, regardless of whether I agreed with the person or not, wasn't good for me. Wasn't going to make me a better person. You know what I mean? And so I made myself a deal. And I remember this very specific. I had a conversation with myself and said, look, over these next 4 years, I want you to watch what he does as honestly as you possibly can do, and I want you to rank your life. Not what you see happening on TV, not what you hear people talking about, not the politics or the drama of it. How do you feel? How has your life changed? Has it gotten easier or harder? That's how I want you to rate this person. And that's what I did. And that was not an easy thing for me to do, because like I said, I hated the man. Genuinely. You can go find the posts back in my history to find it, right? Or you used to be able to. I think I deleted my Facebook. But point is, I came from that place. I kind of watched over the next 4 years, and I realized slowly, very slowly, probably like over the first couple of years, I was still pretty liberal and on that train. And then something happened where I realized at different points, like, wait, this is better. You know, and then like I would go and like I'd be like, wait, this is better. And as I was recognizing these specific qualities of my life, or the world as I saw it, that seemed to be getting better, I recognized that the group that I had been supporting wasn't saying those things. And I was like, wait, like, because the reason I supported you is because you said that you were about truth and honesty and equality and fairness and all of these kind of things. So I thought, you know, that if this person actually did do something good, we'd at least say, oh, that was pretty good. You know, that's at least what's happened to every other president before that. But what happened was the opposite, like active lying. And it was because I was trying to see what the truth was, it was blatantly obvious to me. It was like, oh, wait, you're just like straight up lying about this right now, because I just saw that. Like, I'm on your side. Like, I don't like this guy, but he did that. or whatever it was. I mean, there were specific like foreign relations things that I was very on board with when he started to move the ball, especially about 2 years into the presidency, in terms of what was happening with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Middle East peace deal and stuff. Like, I saw these things as very good progress, in a place that had been war-torn for centuries. And I thought that was a good thing. And I thought it was very odd that nobody else was saying that was a good thing. You know what I mean? Like, matter of fact, they were villainizing him, and that was one of the first things that just keyed me in. And I kept watching, and I slowly realized that I had been brainwashed. As I slowly came out of this and started to really ask myself, what do I like? What things actually affect me? What do I actually believe? I realized that I aligned with almost nothing that I had been taught in school. I studied political science, right? So I was taught this shit. I was taught how to think, that there was a right way to view the world, and that it was the liberal side of things. This is what colleges teach, I can promise you. I was a major in it, right? The idea is that the colleges have already figured out what the right way to run the world politically is, and they teach that to your kids. And then your kids go out and enact it in the world. That's what's been going on. I watched it. I was a part of it. You know what I mean? So I didn't want to be a part of that anymore, and as I let go of those reins, I saw the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party, drive itself off a fucking cliff with Biden, right? And it was like one of those things where I was like, oh my God, thank you for getting me off of that fucking train. Oh my God, thank you. And the feeling that I have for anybody still on it, it's like, jump the fuck off, dude. Like, what? Why are you still supporting people that are actively lying so aggressively? There's no way you could not see that without tricking yourself or lying yourself, being an accomplice in it, which then makes the whole party look like a criminal enterprise. Why would you want to be a part of that? Why would you want to support that? I say as I'm still a registered Democrat, right? But that's just because I haven't gotten around to changing it yet. That's not because I'm a supporter by any means. But I say that to describe the other change that I went through. So I go from there and I start to kind of move away from the Liberal Party, the Democrats, and the media that's starting to become popular was conservative media, specifically, what's his name? I don't watch him anymore because I don't like his show anymore, but can't remember his name. He's one of the big conservative guys that's very kind of abrasive, and he does the change my minds and stuff like that. Some of you may know who he is. You probably put it in the comments. But anyway, I started watching some of these conservative, smaller media platforms on like YouTube and stuff, and I started to really aggressively agree with some of the things that they were saying. But what I also started to realize was that the reason I was agreeing with all the things they were saying is that I was bitter. Like, I was really bitter. Like, really bitter over what had just happened, what I just described to you, the way I had been lied to, right? And what I had just watched happen. Because at the same time, like I said, I was trying to work. This was supposed to be my career. I was supposed to work in politics, right? And I went to DC, and I worked in DC for a summer trying to break into politics. And this partially what made me so disillusioned with it was seeing the way that it actually runs. But another thing that disillusioned me was seeing the way that the Democratic Party made it very clear that they wanted nothing to do with somebody that looked like me. Absolutely nothing to do with me. That anywhere I tried to find a job, I couldn't find one because they were very specifically looking for people that looked exactly the opposite of me. And specifically, I remember at one of the most critical times in my schooling, I was looking for a project that I needed to do as like my thesis to go to DC, and I was trying to find anywhere that I could, like a private organization of any kind that I could join so that I could start to network and develop connections in the political sphere so that I could, make a career out of it. And as I looked, the only thing I could find, and I remember it popped up in a podcast because I was listening to a political podcast, and I'm sitting there like all in and just like really enjoying the podcast, and then up pops up ad from, I think it was actually Hillary Clinton and one of the Clinton foundations, and it was an organization, advertising an organization for people who want to work in politics. And I was like, oh, yes! And I was like, I got all excited as soon as it said, I was like, fuck yeah, like an organization that I could actually get me in the door. That'd be so great, and scaffold the experience somewhat. And then the next sentence was specifically for empowering young women and women of color. And it then went on to describe this was not open to men, right? This was only an opportunity for women. And that hit me hard. because it felt like the organization that I was trying to support, like they really didn't want me. They didn't want me. And that told me kind of everything I needed to know. And so, but I also was very bitter from that. Like, that was hurtful. You know what I mean? And so I had a lot of resentment towards the Democratic side of things, and I started to become kind of more engaged with conservative media. And over the next 4 years, as the next election came around, by the time the 2020 came around, I was fully on board with Trump. So I had gone from voting for Hillary, right, to the next 4 years I was voting for Trump, and I was completely on board. Which is why what happened in that election was so confusing for me. Because, again, I'd come from both sides, and I just wanted to support somebody this time that I didn't the first time, because I didn't see what he was saying. You know, I had been propagandized, to be quite honest. I had been tricked into thinking that this was a completely evil man, as if other people don't have the same qualities, right? These other Democratic politicians. And so I wanted to vote for him, because I was like, okay, I want to make right on that. I feel like you did something for the country over the last 4 years that made it somewhat better, at least in my experience, it seemed like. And I was at least proud to be an American, and I liked that. And I wanted more of that. And so I voted for that. And in my mind, you know, I was still a registered Democrat. And this may have been a lot of projection, but I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, I wonder how many other people are experiencing this. You know, or if I'm just kind of an oddball out here. But I wondered in 2020, like, are other people changing their minds too? Like, are other people starting to see that maybe Trump isn't like the worst person in the world and might be better than somebody that's really old and debatably senile? And then I watched the election happen. And what I saw happen in the election was, I don't know, but a process other than what I had watched for the previous elections I had seen up until that point. And it confused me, you know? It was like, I felt like no matter what side of the spectrum I switched to, I could not get my vote to land. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wanted to fucking... the representation that I identified with, regardless of what side of the spectrum I was on. And so again, I think this kind of just led me to believe that I wasn't welcome in the society. You know, and I think a lot of men started feeling that way, and were started to become attracted to the conservative movement. And there's a lot of conservative commentators that have taken advantage of this, of a lot of very damaged, broken men who are hurt that the country that they have defended, right, that many of them have served, that their fathers have died for, now are being told that they're not good enough to do anything here, that their votes are worthless, right? And that's a real pain that is being experienced, right, in the country right now. I can tell you that from firsthand experience. It is why you're seeing so much anger coming from the right. It's why you're seeing that bubble up in the country, and why you're going to see a big wave of that in this political election. But what I'm more nervous about is what comes after that, because I am under no delusions that either side is the good guy, right? Like I said, I've watched over the next 4 years after the 2020 election as that same conservative movement, you know, news movement, new media movement grew. It did nothing but burn that fire hotter, threw more wood on it, right? And honestly started to tear down over the last couple of years the United States itself. The same political movement that argues it conserves the United States has started to attack it in very specific ways, weird ways, because of the way they believe it's been infiltrated by bad actors, right? And so we have two political parties that I believe are actually militant at this point against each other, that are actively fighting a war, using the American people as collateral, right? And this is why the elections are so broken. And this is why there is no point in defending either side. right? If you find yourself in that game still, get yourself the fuck out of it before it destroys you. And I mean that, because it's going to cause people to do nasty things. Really nasty things. It's gotten to a point on both sides where the gloves are completely off. And I think especially right now on the liberal side, with all of the chaos that's erupting, you're going to see some chaos start to pop out towards the other group. Conservatives, same way. This next election is not going to be easy. And because it's already been muddied, because I believe we've had two political parties being bad actors for a very long time, doing whatever they can to get their power, their political party in power. I believe they've already bastardized the system in that way, rigged it to their own benefit. So that what the American people is charged with now is finding a candidate that can identify that problem, root it out, and clean the government of the rot that it's infested it for the last decade or more, arguably 30 or 40, right? But that what we don't need is a tearing down of the system, which is why I'm scared of the conservative movement right now. Because while it's designed to conserve, that is the fundamental of it, it's supposed to conserve the fundamental ideals of the United States. Once it believes those ideals have already been breached, then it's the force that aggressively tears that thing down. Right? It can very quickly become that, and a force of tyranny. And I do believe that that's what the direction you see the conservative movement really quickly moving. I say this because I've heard conversations starting to pop up that are like, if you heard it 2 years ago, you'd be like, that's like a really extreme thing to say. For example, I watch like PBD podcast, Patrick Bet-David's podcast. I watch, what's some other ones that I watch here? I watch a lot of Jordan Peterson too, but I don't necessarily consider him conservative. I watch the Breaking Points Right and Left podcast. There's some other ones, I just can't think of them right now. But on a couple of the more conservative ones, I've heard multiple times Tim Pool, a conversation about the right to vote, specifically in context of women, right? Now, many of you may not be aware of this, but this is an active conversation that is taking place in the more extreme parts of the conservative movement right now. But there is an active conversation, and I don't mean to be fearmonger by this, to revoke the right to vote for women. And this is being talked about as if it's a good idea, right? We're bringing up points on like Tim Pool about why that would be a better way to do things, about how when women didn't have the right to vote, it was a better system. And I understand the arguments these people are bringing up, that there's practical problems that introducing the right to vote, women's suffrage, had on the economy and the society and all of that. I understand that. But if you think the solution to that is to go backwards and take away the freedoms that you've granted to half of humanity, I think you're the tyrant. I don't have any qualms about saying that. That is the reflexive, that's the pattern of that conservative side of things, is it always looks retrospectively and wants to go backwards to the shining hill on this shining city on the hill in the past, right? That never really existed, right? But that, because it never existed, because it's in the past, it's not here, I can convince you that it was better, right? There's this wishful thinking built into it. And this is, I think, the sickness that's starting to manifest inside of the conservative movement right now. And so watch for that as well if you find yourself on that side of the political spectrum, because it's really easy to get caught in right now, and you might find yourself unintentionally agreeing with things that after the fact, if you really sit down and think about it, be like, I don't know if I agree with that. For instance, with those conversations about revoking women's suffrage and going backwards in that sense. To me, it was like they brought up a lot of data, like points about how society has gotten worse, the economy has gotten worse since the political system has gotten worse since the introduction of women's suffrage. But in my mind, that doesn't indicate that we need to reverse women's suffrage. That indicates that we had half of humanity that wasn't represented up until that period of time, so that the systems that were enacted weren't a good reflection of those people either, right? So that it took time And it's going to take a lot of time for us to figure out how to make those systems reflect the entirety of our society, not just half of it, right? That's a big problem. But there's also more than that. There's also a problem of, if you don't have the right to vote, if you haven't been educated in the political system, or the way that, or any of the underlying educational necessities that you need so that you can make an educated choice or decision on political, problems. If that hasn't been your job for all of human history, right? Like, take all of womanhood. If that wasn't your role to do that ever, and then all of a sudden you have this responsibility, vote. Are you going to be well informed, right? About your choices, about who you're voting for? Or will it be really easy to manipulate? Will it be really easy to tell you that if you want to make the world a better place, this person's the problem and we need to take them out of power, right? What I do believe has happened, and part of the side of this argument that I could find some truth in, is that I believe that we've done a shitty job of integrating women into the political system, mostly because we have been actively trying to keep the populace in general stupid so that it doesn't know how to vote, so that it just votes for whatever we tell them to vote. But if we were really trying to make the system run correctly, what we do is invest heavily early in childhood, specifically in education, on the principles that undergird the system that we've created, so that when those people get to an age where they can enact and vote, they have that fundamental understanding built in, right, to every citizen, so that they already know, they have those fundamental conceptions, so they can perceive the world at an even level, right? And this is something that didn't happen. And I do believe it's why we've gone through a lot of the growing pains that we've seen, especially over the last 60, 80 years with the first wave, second wave, third wave feminist movements, right? I believe it's been a manipulation of that populace for political control. And I think you can see that playing out, the end stages of that playing out right now in the Biden administration, right? You can see it with the chaos and with the lies, the obscuring the truth. The good thing is that we're coming out of this. And the reason I brought it up is so that people understand that that's a conversation that is actively being had right now on the conservative side of things. So that's what we have to look for moving forward. And that's what you don't want you find yourself falling prey to or victim to, is this extremism on either side, where we somehow figure out a way to justify taking people's rights away, right? Or we somehow figure out a way of justifying creating second-class citizens, right? Taking those people's rights away, but not mine. What's actually scarier about that conversation is that a majority of the people that have been in those conversations about women's suffrage have been women. So like I think on the Tim Pool one, it was all women and Tim Pool, and the women were agreeing that they don't want to have the right to vote. And that's actually an example of what I mean, right? There's stories about, I just heard on another podcast, actually, I think it was Tim Pool, of Harriet Tubman, I think it was, when she was trying to free slaves. She would go to some slaves, many slaves, and part of the frustration she would have is she would tell them, go, be free. And many of them wouldn't do anything. Would be like, what do you mean? Because there wasn't an understanding of what free was, right? And this is something I think that's actually at play in the larger world at scale right now. That a large part of the reason why the United States is under such fire is because a large portion of the world does not have a conception of what it means to actually be free. They've been lied to. They've been given alternate versions of freedom that masquerade as the real version, right? Not that we have the perfect version by any means, but I do believe that we have the fundamental idea ironed out correctly. And so that there's these ways in which if you don't grow up in a system that raises freedom, justice, individual sovereignty above everything else, you think differently, you view the world differently, and it actively becomes harder to understand why those things are valuable. so that it's easier to create a society where tyranny and despotism reign, right? Because the citizenry will actually justify it. And I do believe that this is something that's happened, like I said, to the scale at mass, specifically in countries that experienced harsh control under communist regimes, but also in the United States, like I said, in terms of the feminist movement and women's suffrage. Because while the principles, I think, of granting the right to vote to women was correct, there's work that has to be done in order to, what's the right word? Integrate that new voting bloc into society properly so that it can be an informed voting bloc, not one that votes based on political direction, right? That votes based on somebody with a really good way of speaking telling them that that's the bad guy. And what immediately happened, actually, what started women's suffrage was first wave feminism, right? So part of the problem, I believe, is that the entire idea of women's suffrage is wrapped up with the feminist movement, but the feminist movement is actually a manipulation of women itself, a way that they can control women, that women can control other women and get them to vote with them, right? And because there had been no right to vote up until that point, it was exceedingly easy to convince most women early on where to vote. Right. As a matter of fact, this is a really interesting point I just heard about. Did you know that, I guess, and I had no idea, that apparently during women's suffrage, right, when we were trying to get the right to vote for women, that they did polling, and that you'd assume that the way that movement would come about would have been like grassroots, right? That women got really angry that they didn't have the right to vote. This is kind of how the story's told, and that they all kind of combined under this first wave feminism and pushed for women's suffrage. But polling shows something different. Apparently, at the time, for when the vote for women's suffrage was going through, they did polling of the women in the United States. And they apparently only 4%, not 40, 4% of women supported women's suffrage when it was passed. Which is confusing, right? It's like you would assume that the people wanting women's suffrage would have been the women, right? But what it looks like, actually, and this is assuming that data was real, I assume it is, that if that isn't the case, if that is true, if only 4% of the population when women's suffrage came to be actually supported, if only 4% of the women actually supported women's suffrage, then why was there a push for women's suffrage? Because it wasn't coming from the women, right? This is why it becomes important to understand the idea of, individual liberty and freedom, because if you don't have that concept ingrained yet, you're easy to manipulate. And I believe that political actors in the United States recognized that we had half of the population that they could manipulate as a voting bloc, but the only way they could do that is to convince them that they want to vote, because they didn't want to vote. And that's backed up in data. And so you had to construct a movement, a feminist first wave movement, to convince the women and to make the whole world think that the women wanted this. But if you look at what happens after feminism comes to be, things get worse for women in a lot of different ways, leading up to what we have now, right? While you do have certain rights enshrined in law, you also have women going from a place of having kind of, while granted not as much economic power directly, which I would argue that's not even true. I would argue that traditional women had as much, if not more, economic power than they do now, specifically because that was part of the design of the two-parent household. Was and you may have experienced this if you had a traditional family, that a lot of times the way you divide up the work is the man would go and work the job and make the money, but the woman would do a lot of the accounting tasks. She would take care of the money, right? She would do a lot of that and a lot of times spend a lot of the money for the house, right? And so if you look at it from that way, the women had a lot of purchasing power, which is why most marketing was marketed towards mothers in the 50s and 60s, not men. It's because mothers were at home, had the TV on, and had the buying power to buy all of this stuff for the house, right? These are all narratives that aren't talked about because it goes against the feminist structure of how society has progressed. Because at that point in history, from the feminist point of view, men were taking advantage of women and forcing them to stay in the home, right? And while I'm sure that's true to some degree in certain cases, I believe that's a really ridiculous assumption to make if that's the system that's been in place for all of human history, you know, for most of it at least. It's a pretty audacious assumption, you know. But I have no idea why I ended up going on a big talk about feminism. That wasn't my intention at all. I think the reason is because I'm trying to start to break into some of these topics that are more controversial and speak on them in ways that I believe are true, so that if that isn't something that's being talked about, the conversation can start to move that direction. Because I believe, like I've said before, the only way you do that is by kind of speaking what you see. And I believe, as I've just laid out here over the last hour and a half, that the liberal side of things, the conservative side of things are both very, very wrong, are highly led astray, and are intentionally trying to manipulate the populace to support their side of things because they already know they fucked up. They already know they sinned too bad, and they want to convince you, through getting you to support them, that what they did wasn't that bad. Right? And I believe that there's also forces, like I described with feminism, that have been directing that narrative over time, specifically to manipulate populations, to gain power, right, over the population, and to enact laws and changes to a political system that is the most robust in human history, right? If you design a political system like the United States that you can only change fundamentally through amendment, where all of these different states have to get together and agree that we're going to change it, it's so arduous a process that it frustrates people that are thirsty for power, right? People that are tyrannical because they want to move quickly to that position of power. So that the United States has been and always will be a very, very big target for psychopaths and sociopaths of all ilks, right? Because one, they're like gnats to a fucking light. They love power, right? So it's the most powerful place in the world. The trick is, it's designed to catch people who want power and make them really obvious. That's the beauty of what the Founding Fathers did with the United States and the Constitution. It's specifically designed, and the way that you can tell this, most people don't recognize this, but it's designed to catch. It's not designed to keep bad actors out. You can't do that. They're that insidious. They're gnats to a light. They'll figure a fucking way in, right? But what you can do is design a system that plans on those people being able to get in and highlights them so that the populace can know who they are, right? And I do believe that that's what the Founding Fathers designed here. And the highlight, the thing that they use to highlight the people, is it's a very simple thing. Who's trying to change the system? Right? Who's arguing that the system is the problem? Right? That we need to tear down the legal construction that the Founding Fathers put in place. That's the highlighter. That's the spotlight. As soon as somebody tries to go about that, like as soon as they try to change the laws that way, they're doing it the wrong way. It's not that the underlying motivation could be true. Maybe it is a good thing. Maybe you want, like women's suffrage or something, right? And you want to make that a thing. Well, you still have to amend the Constitution to do that. That's what we did with women's suffrage, right? That's a long, arduous process. So, and the Founding Fathers put that in place so that if you wanted to do it properly, you could. You just had to take your time and you had to make sure other people agreed so that you weren't a tyrant. Anybody else trying to change the system outside of that process is a tyrant. It's that simple. They made it very simple for us. Everybody else that you've seen, regardless of the political side they're on, that says this law is wrong, or this amendment needs to go away, or we need to fundamentally change the way the United States works in this way or that, or that the United States is the problem, right? The United States is the thing that's caused all of these issues around the world. The United States, those are the literal psychopaths in our world. The United States was designed specifically to highlight them. And because they believe they're so smart, they're too stupid to recognize that they highlight themselves by saying those things. That's the truth. I really believe that. And I hope that's helpful to anybody watching, because, I know I've lost a lot of people as I've gone into the political side. That's okay. Not every message is for everyone, right? But for those of you that are watching and listening, I hope that's helpful, because this system is beautiful. And as yesterday was July 4th, I did a podcast episode on, and I really went on a rant on that one. I kind of lost my temper to a certain degree, but I think justifyingly so, because of the way in which our understanding and our view of the United States Constitution, like the actual style of government, the fundamental documents that are in place and the principles that are established on, the way in which we've lost our respect for those is not just sad. It's like practically concerning. It's very concerning, right? Because it means that the system is there's nobody else defending the system but the system itself, right? So like literally just the document is protecting itself right now, and the design of it, because everybody else is saying, fuck you, United States. Right? The people that are supposed to defend it, the people that believe in these principles, are also saying, fuck you, United States. That's the whole point. I think that's, if you look around the world and you ask who would benefit from United States people having an attitude like that, you'll start to understand where it's coming from, why we're experiencing these things. We're being mentally manipulated. Intensely. We are at war in that sense. Very intensely. But anyway, let me see if I can catch up on some comments. Hello, Celine. Mindy, you voted this year? Very nice. Phoenician said, Donald Trump said, do not surround yourself with people that complain about the government. Yeah, and that's a really cool comment, Phoenician. I like that. There's that actually relates to a quote from Jesus, too. And again, this is going to be a paraphrasing, but there's a very specific teaching that he talks about at some point in the New Testament. Can't remember specifically, but he's talking to one of the disciples, and the disciples, it might have been Paul or something like that, but he's talking to him about injustice from the government, from the state, from the Romans, right? And the way that they've been mistreated. And there's like this kind of revolutionary tone to the conversation. And Jesus has a really weird response to the disciple when he kind of suggests this, like, they're being unfair to us, and like we need to rise up against them, kind of a thing. He puts it down and says, kind of the same as you wouldn't question your father, don't question the authority in the world, unless that authority steps on the grand authority, right? So he gave you like a very specific way to deal with government, and that is obey the laws as long as they are lawful. Right? And what does that mean, lawful? Well, it means it matches up with the principles that are outlined by whatever you believe in, whatever divinity you believe in, right? So, because those are the real laws of the world, of the earth, right? That's the only laws that ever will and ever can exist. But us as human beings, we trick ourselves into thinking we can make better ones. So we pass these other versions of them, right? Thousands of them. The way you test that, and by default, you're supposed to, as Jesus kind of says there, you're supposed to obey the law as you would obey your father. And it's only when that law steps or tramples on the fundamental law that you have a right, or actually responsibility, to say no. And that's when you find the rest of the story of Jesus and his execution and stuff, right? So it's not that you're supposed, and this is one of the ways that the message is being muddied modern day, is a lot of the stuff that's being taught in college is revolutionary, like radically revolutionary, and it specifically comes from Eastern Europe and the Communist Revolution and the Marxist Manifesto. It speaks specifically about tearing down ideals and systems, right? And this is a lot of what's taught inside of the political schools in colleges. Not just the political schools, it's seeped into basically every other discipline at this point. So that there's this underlying radicalism that's taught and put into our children as they turn into autonomous beings, so that by the time they have this like inbuilt mistrust of any type of authority,
And they have a radical nature where they will justify any action against the state as long as it doesn't align with what they think is true. And that's different, right? Because what they think is true is something that has been given to them, right? By the teachers. It's not based on fundamental religious principle. A matter of fact, you're not allowed to talk about that kind of stuff in most schools nowadays. No, what's given to you is this demystified version of principles distilled from mislabeled versions of the Communist Manifesto, very specifically. After the fall of communism, I promise you, they didn't change any of the fundamental principles or assumptions that were made in establishing that system. All they did was change the title. That's it. And then started teaching it in the United States and around the rest of the Western world. Because here, if you tried out this system and it destroyed and basically nuked your entire country from a social standpoint and economic standpoint, well, there is one benefit. You now have a really good weapon against another country, right? You know exactly how to dismantle a country from the inside out. If you want to know what's happening in the United States right now, that's what's happening. I can promise you. There is an active movement, an intentional movement to dismantle the system of government that we have here because it is so robust. It threatens despotic and tyrannical actors around the world. If you want to know which ones it threatens or which ones I'm talking about, just look at the ones that are trying to attack us most viciously, right? Look at the ones that are trying to make the United States look like an immoral actor. Because as soon as we're not a moral thing anymore, somebody else gets to be, right? The manipulation is deep. And, I don't know these things for a fact, obviously. This is not something I can prove to you. I do have evidence of it that I will get into at some point in some podcasts in the future. But I can't necessarily prove it to you. I can only kind of tell you the symptoms of it. And we've kind of done this throughout this live, right? Some of the symptoms, but the ways in which you've seen society shift so drastically over the last 50 or 60 years in the United States from one that was as cohesive as any society that you could arguably have seen throughout human history, even though it had its issues, right? One of the most high-functioning societies you've ever seen, going from that to one that is as dysfunctional as I could imagine, as dysfunctional as Rome was at the fall of Rome, right? And that took hundreds of years to happen in Rome, right? A natural decaying of a state, it takes hundreds of years. It takes a long time because it takes generations of people slowly becoming kind of like unenthusiastic and going from loving a place to hating a place in one generation. That's intentional. That's designed. That's taught. So what I would say is just moving forward, recognize and give yourself credit for the amount of shit that you are wading through every single day in terms of information and chaos in the world, because you are here for a very specific reason. This is a time frame in which the world is changing fundamentally, right? And you have to be here because you have some frequency. You hold something that's very specific, and we need you to hold that through this process. I need you to be yourself through this entire process as everything's imploding, so that there's something standing at the end, so that there's somebody that still appreciates the principles that were here before all this chaos started, right? You can do that. I can do that, and we can do that together and not be alone in doing that if we have the courage to say it out loud and the courage to call out the people that are being dishonest, right? And I believe that that's why you're sitting here with me today, and that's why I'm going to continue to do this and why this is going to grow and why we're going to see how far we can grow it, because I believe this is a message that needs to be heard around the world, right? And I believe that it's something that can invigorate you and enable you to be whatever you want to be, truly, not in the fucking marketing sense, the way that was shoved down 90s kids' throats. No, actually be what you want to be, not the things, be anything you want to be out of this book that we give you. That's what it was. No, be whatever the fuck you want to be. What you actually want to be, what you love, what you enjoy, not what's logical, not what makes the most money, not what will get you a good 401k, right? do what you love. And more people doing what they love is a better place. So, for sure. Let's see here. Is my dog snoring? Can you hear her? Yeah, she is. Yeah, little Dixie, where's she at? Here we go. There she is. She's sleepy. Oh, I don't know if you guys saw it in my videos. I want to show you guys while I'm on live here. I have this cool little music box that I made. Look at, there it is. I'll just take it out of here for a second. I was going through hobby store because I used to be super into hobbies. Like I used to be really into models and stuff when I was a kid. And I'd been getting the urge to go and find one, but I wanted to like find one that was meaningful, that wasn't just like one I'd make and put in the closet. And so I was trying to find like a Titanic because I really like the Titanic and I want a Titanic model on my desk. But I couldn't find one that was like nice enough. They were all kind of like just toy looking and stuff. I wanted one that I could really make look legit. And so I was walking through, I went to Hobby Lobby and I went to Hobby Bench, and I was walking through the Hobby Bench. I couldn't really find anything. Everything was kind of expensive. And as I was walking out, I hear this music box going, and me and my mom turn around, and there's these little music boxes. Let me show you very quick. That I just think are the coolest freaking things in the world. They're made out of wood, like that, and they have, like, this one's a cello, right? And it's got little gears, and you put them together. They're little models. But then there's a music box inside. So check this out. And then everything moves. Look at that. Is that not like the coolest freaking thing ever? And so I made a video of it a couple days ago just to kind of post on TikTok, so you might have already seen it, but I don't know what's so fascinating about moving gears to me. And wood, like working with wood specifically, is very, very, very satisfying. So I think I kind of want to start doing more of that stuff too, you know, and I might even had the idea, it's kind of a cool thing to do live, you know, because the process is very kind of meditative and zen. And so I think the next one I do, whichever one I ended up, they had a piano that I thought was really cool. It was like it was the same thing, but the keys would move and shit. It was like really intricate. It was super cool. So I want to get that one and put that one together. And maybe when I do that, I'll do some lives and we can kind of do this and talk and chat while I'm doing the model. I think that would be kind of a fun idea. So Vicky says, I don't feel men are any more educated about politics. No, and I hope you don't misunderstand what I mean when I was talking about that. It's not about men or women, and specifically not about being more intelligent or more educated in that way. It's truly about how you're perceiving the world. It's an understanding of there's a lot of argument around, like, we've been fed this idea that the most effective way to run a democratic system is to have everybody voting. But as a matter of fact, that wasn't the way the Founding Fathers designed the system. This is usually used as like an attack against the United States, but initially only wealthy white landowners were allowed to vote under the Constitution. And most people attribute racism to that. But I don't believe that was the case. I don't believe that our Founding Fathers were innately racist. I believe they were practical. And they recognized that most people are uneducated. And they knew this. They spoke about it very kind of aggressively, actually, in a lot of the founding writings. You can hear how much they're thinking about how much they don't trust the populace. I mean, and think about in their time, like in 1700s, late 1700s, almost every person couldn't read, right? There was very few people that were literate. Most people didn't go to school, right? There was no like established kind of school system in that way. You were self-taught or taught at home, or you'd go to a boarding school at a certain age if your parents or your family could afford it, but you didn't, or college, but you didn't get this kind of Renaissance style education in the way that we've gotten. So there was no foundation of knowledge to base off of. So that there was a really good argument for white wealthy landowners being the people to vote, because at the time white men were the only people that could own land, right? And the reason that they wanted a landowner was because the landowner was somebody that had a stake in the game, something to lose, so that they knew that they wouldn't sabotage the system with their vote, right? They needed to know that you weren't going to manipulate the system with your vote. So they wanted you to have a stake in it. On top of that, those people also tended to be the most educated, right? So they had a reasoning, because if you were a wealthy white landowner, you most likely also owned slaves. And if you owned slaves, that also meant your majority of your day was taken up through education, reading. All the founding fathers, that was majority of what their days were, right? Was educating themselves to a large degree. So they were very learned men, and these were the types of people they wanted voting on the harshest problems of the day. And to me, this all makes a lot of logical sense. It doesn't seem very racist when you view it from that way. You could see how it could be construed as racist if you back up about 1,000 feet and look at it from way, way, way back. But if you view it practically, that's not at all where they were motivated from. They were doing it because they wanted the country to be resilient and robust. And they knew that a majority of the population wouldn't provide a reliable vote because they wouldn't know what they're voting for, right? And until they had actually had some stake in the game, they wouldn't have a reason to vote. If they didn't have a stake in the game and they had the power to vote, they would have more incentive to tear the system down, right? Because they won't lose anything if it does go away. Whereas if you're a landowner, you have an incentive to keep the system around because it also is what protects the land that you own, right? And so these are the problems that were introduced with women's suffrage, right? Those ones. Because at the time, those were the problems, right? At the same kind of problems. Women couldn't own property, right? Before women's, in the early 1900s, everything was kind of through the patriarchal, the father's side. They couldn't even carry debt until like the late 70s, right? Or a credit card. And so the idea was that because there wasn't an active stake in the game in that sense, from a personal level, there wasn't a justification for a vote. Because if there was, it would be actually highly dangerous. There could be a high possibility that that group of people could be motivated to tear the system down, specifically because of the reasons that have been cited, because the system didn't treat them as equal, and there are all of these other reasons, right? The idea that the United States was based on equality, like that was a founding principle of the United States, is untrue. It does not speak about equality in the founding documents. It speaks about liberty and freedom and justice. It does speak about it to a certain extent in the idea of the pursuit of happiness, right? This idea that we all have the equal opportunity to pursue the lives that we want. And there is a suggestion in that all life is created equal. And I do believe in those fundamentals. But when I talk about equality, it's a different thing, right? That's not the equality that I'm talking about when I talk about equality politically. I'm talking about a political movement for physical equity, right? That started at a different time, and I think that actually was more intentional than we recognize. Most of the radical liberal movements came from Europe, right? France and Germany specifically. More specifically France. Most of it came from France. And a lot of the revolutionary fervor was inspired by France, and our revolutions have a lot in common for that reason. But they differ in a lot of different ways. Specifically after the fact, the French Revolution divulged into one of the most violent, heinous parts of human history you can ever look up if you want to. I mean, the French Revolution was absolutely horrifying. And many people have asked, why did the United States Revolution go so differently than the French Revolution, right? What was different about that? And it's actually kind of besides the point, but there was some fundamental assumptions that were different, and one of them was like the United States while it did have this ideal that all human beings are created equal, it didn't enshrine that necessarily at like a legal level, which is why we had the necessity to free the slaves and to have women's suffrage, right? That's why those amendments came to be, because that wasn't enshrined at the base of the system, right? Those kind of ideas were principles that were enshrined at the base of what you would refer to as communist systems. At the turn of the century, the late 1800s, as Marx is working on the Manifesto in Germany, and that idea starts to spread, right? A large part of why it was very attractive to the masses is because it preached a certain type of economic equality, right? That what was it, from each according to his ability to each according to their need, something like that. It's this idea that if you can provide for the state, you should provide as much as you can, and in that effort you will be provided for in every way that you need, so that you don't have to worry about what you have. You always have what you need, and everybody shares in that equity, right? So that the whole system is equalized. That idea is antithetical to the United States. The United States is designed on people, individuals, defining what they are separate from other people, actually, very specifically, so that they express themselves, which is where the vote comes from, right? I need your perspective that's different than theirs so I can tell what the fuck's going on here. I don't want you to be exactly the same with all the same stuff and the same house and the same food and that, because you'll have the same fucking opinion as him. You know what I mean? Two fundamentally different systems. Those ideas didn't just infiltrate Russia. They infiltrated most of Europe, right? And even though the communist system didn't get instituted at a political level in places like France and Germany and those other areas, well, at least part of it, I guess, half of Germany, but you get the point. They still, from an educational level, from like a philosophical level, were very attractive to the populations, and specifically the people in positions of power, thinkers, the gatekeepers of education. And so after the late 1900s into the mid 1900s, as communism was actively failing, as these ideas were being shown to be wrong, there was, I think, a very intentional move to drive the ideas underground, to relabel them, take away the communism, but to keep the fundamental principle of equality intact, and to use a different leverage point for it, right? And so what did we do? We used that message in, like, take the United States, for example, from a race perspective, right? From a gender perspective, instead of an economic one. That's all we did. We switched out the economic argument for more of a social argument, a race and a gender-based argument, right? But then we're still trying to equalize the society. Thus, you've seen the same chaos ensue inside of the society, right? That's very intentional. That's like an infection that was put inside of the United States. I don't think the United States wanted that kind of infection. As a matter of fact, it fought most of the 20th century to avoid that kind of infection from taking over the entire world, right? So that now that it is here, we kind of have a duty or a responsibility to recognize that these truths that sound very pretty on the surface, like equality, when they are enacted in a legal system, in a state system, what they produce is absolute tyranny. Not just tyranny, but genocide on the biggest scale we've ever seen. Truly. And I ask you, if you don't consider the genital mutilation that's happening in the transsexual community and all of the push for that and the push for abortions and the push for all of that, if you don't consider that similar to a genocidal movement, you're not looking at the end product properly. It's all about the end product. Effectively, what happens? Less people alive. That's the goal, right? The goal is less people alive. And what's so sad about that is it's hard for the average human being to think that there could ever be a system that fucking evil. That's why we deny it even is possible. Because it sounds like a fanciful thing that only exists in a storybook. But I promise you, there are villains that big. Specifically, Karl Marx was a villain that fucking big. I truly believe he was a brilliant individual that did not know, or actually intentionally knew, the power of his own ideas and designed a system to blow up the entire world. I believe that's what communism is. A system designed to blow up the entire world. It's a nuclear bomb in the form of thought. And Karl Marx intentionally made that nuclear bomb and then gave it to the world. Right. So, be proud of who you are, regardless of what's going on in the world and what you believe in. I believe that the principles that this country is based on are true. Liberty, right? Your right to pursue whatever life you want to pursue, as long as that doesn't infringe on somebody else's ability to do the same, right? Your freedom to say what you believe as loudly and as long as you want to, right? Your right to live, right? To have a life separate from a state or from any other individual. These are things that when, they're very fundamental and simple, but they establish a system that's very sturdy. And while it's not perfect, it's the sturdiest system I've seen from what I can find, and we need to protect that. And there's far too little of that going on right now in the world. There's far too little people defending those kind of ideas as good, because we've been called racist and we've been called all these other names for even speaking on those principles. But if something's not true, it's never going to be made true just because somebody says it a million times. So I believe that the United States is on the up and up, actually. I believe that any other country that believes in those principles is on the up and up. And I believe any actor, wherever they are, any leader, person who calls themselves leader that would fight against those truths doesn't understand the truth of the universe, right? And is fighting a losing war, and you can have faith in that, right? That whatever the truth is will be shown. And I for sure don't know what the entire truth is. These are my guesses, right? We will find out at some point. But the whole point is that we look and we try to be as honest as we can be about what we see. Thank you for all your sweet comments. I really appreciate all of you hanging out with me like this. I wasn't sure if I would even... there is a population decline, Mindy, absolutely. I wasn't even sure if I would get very many people on here because it's been so long, you know what I mean? But I was really pleasantly surprised there for a while. We had a ton of people sitting in here during the channeled message portion, for sure. It's interesting how, like certain energies just want to talk and then they'll leave. And then I can watch as the audience, will leave at the same time. It's so interesting because people don't know that they're intuitive, but people show up just for certain portions and they'll get that portion and then they'll go. And it's I don't know if they recognize that they did that. You know what I mean? I don't know if you recognize that you just popped in for very specific part that I don't say hardly ever, but you somehow were here for just that and you left. You know what I mean? I find it hilarious. Anyway. Absolutely, Robbie. Thank you for being here and supporting me. I appreciate it. Yeah, I kind of just wanted to get through a little bit of the anxiety, I think, of being on live again, because it is super frustrating. Mindy, I'm sure you've realized that at this point. I've seen you out there on live. Anybody that is on here right now, check out Mindy the Vegetarian. She has a great page, and she goes live quite often too. So follow her stuff. We did a little dual live the other day. That was kind of fun. So thank you, Mindy, for your support, and anybody watching, follow her as well. Yeah, there is a population decline, Mindy, and it's interesting that you said that. There's it's because it's something that I think we're all under the assumption that the population is still growing. We were told that for so long. That the population is going to grow out of control. Is growing out of control, that we just kind of assumed it continued on that trajectory, but it does appear to have turned around. Not in all countries, but in most. And while in the United States we still have a positive population in terms of the amount of babies we're having versus the amount of people that are dying, there's many countries that do not have the same. Specifically, actually, the countries that I have spoken about here that I believe have a certain type of animus towards the United States and are trying to subvert it. Those countries specifically actually are in pretty dire straits in terms of their population. And it's really ironic, actually, the reasons that they are. Because if you take both China and Russia as examples, the two countries that have had the biggest genocides in the last 100 years are, what do you know, running out of people. You know what I mean? Yet they're still trying to convince the world that the United States is the worst thing in the world. But didn't you kill like 12 million of your people like 80 years ago or something? 60 years ago? Did we forget that? Or no? You know, China, same thing. The biggest genocide in human history. 100 years ago. Less than 100 years ago. Who do you want to believe? Right? I don't know. But I'm going to trust the guys that didn't genocide half the human population. But anyway. All right. Well, I think I am running out of juice for today. I've been on here for quite a while, actually. Kind of a good one. But I'm going to be on here again soon. Like I said, I just lost my Instacart job, I think, or they put me on pause or something. I mean, I'm not surprised. I kind of went off on one of the customer service people because they were not doing their job. So, but shit happens. And you know what's interesting is one of the things I've been getting is, I really don't like that job. I don't like any job. I like doing this. I like making music, you know, and that's been my whole goal, is getting to a point where I can make money doing things that I love, you know. And so I appreciate all of you that have supported and gifted during this, because it really does help me. But it's really hard to get yourself to pull away and fully invest in something like this, and to trust that, like I was saying very early on in this live about the process of God supporting you. And, you know, it's ironic because like a year before this, I lost my DoorDash job out of blue for no reason. They just kind of cut me off. I'm like, oh, okay. Which is why I got the Instacart job. And these were all stopgaps, you know, just temporary things so I could make some money while I'm getting this going and while I'm healing. And where I'm at now is, you know, I hope you can see, like, I feel so much better. I don't feel out of energy or tired or sick anymore. And so now I was like, you know, yesterday I was thinking about that job going away. I was like stressing out a little bit. I was a little anxious, if I'm being honest. And I forced myself, you know, to kind of sit in that though and be like, it's going to be okay. You know, it's going to be okay. You just can't see what's coming. So just try to think about what's coming. And I recognized that if that's happening, right, if I'm seeing one avenue shut down, it means that another one's opening up. And for me, at least, the things that have been holding me back from being able to do this consistently are either gone or going away, almost completely going away. And so there's like a nice alignment in that, right, where I can see the universe kind of conspiring for me. And if I'm not careful, I'll confuse that actually as a negative indicator, like, oh my God, I'm going to lose another job. But when I actually sit with myself and ask, what do I want? I kind of don't want that job. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, that job actually really pisses me off. That job takes advantage of me every single day, and I hate that. And it makes me hate the company for taking advantage of me. And so what I've realized is, like, I don't need to be in that. I don't deserve to be treated that way anymore. The only reason I've allowed myself to be treated that way is I felt, like I said at the very beginning of this live, like I needed to provide for myself. You know, like God hasn't got my back. Well, if you don't view it that way, nothing can happen, you know, it can't have your back. But if you do, if you take the moment to see where the silver lining is, it allows room for whatever could happen to maybe happen. You know what I mean? So I think there's a message in that for everybody here. You know, if you're discouraged about anything, if you've been trying to get something off the ground, I am here to tell you that it takes as long as it takes. You know, that could be longer than it's taken me. It could be shorter than it's taken me. But all I know is it's going to take longer than you want it to. I promise you that. Because we want it now, right? So trust in that. Trust that when whatever you create, whatever you make, it's going to be here when it's supposed to, kind of like a baby, right? And while we have a general time frame, we know that baby's coming, they kind of decide when they want to come, right? And one day they're just like, hey, today's the day. That's kind of how it is, I think, you know, with our creations, when we create something. So if you're in that creative process too, if you're doing that, allow yourself time to gestate, to be pregnant. You know what I mean? eat funky food and, you know, enjoy the process of creating, bringing life into the world. And then when the baby's ready, it'll say, I'm ready. You know what I mean? Let's do this thing. And you'll know it's time to put it in gear, right? But we have to tune into that maternal side of ourselves, the feminine side of ourselves, and recognize that anytime we create anything, we are in effect going through a pregnancy, right? It's a symbolic representation of that, and that we need to treat it in the same way, with the same kind of love and care. And if you do, what you'll see is a manifestation of that love and care right in front of you in 9 months, or however long it takes, right? So anyway, kind of a funny analogy, I guess, but all right. Well, I think I'm gonna leave it there, guys. Lots of love. I'll be back, I don't know if tomorrow or next day, but I'll be back on here soon as I feel like it. I appreciate you, Jessica. Thank you. And all of you for gifting and for supporting and for all of the good energy. You know, that's one thing I will say before I go, is it's nice. You know, I can feel the energy shift. There's an energy shift that's happened. When I used to go live on TikTok, it was much more chaotic. And not that I'm sure there's people that have jumped in and said weird things at times and stuff. That always happens. But it seems like in general, the collective is different. I don't know how to describe it. There's a difference. People are waking up. People are a little calmer, I guess, a little more like open to hearing, it seems like. And that's something that's very encouraging in the world, that people are starting to recognize honesty when they see it. You know what I mean? Like authenticity when they see it. And that's a beautiful thing. Because then you can start to be it. You know, once you see it, once you recognize you can see it, then you know, oh, I can be that. You know, I know what my version of that is. So, you too, Mindy, have a blessed day, and I guess that's what I'll leave it with. Lots of love. Bye.